Great. I think we have a good enough audience. Let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here today. Peter, my partner in crime, joins me in welcoming all of you to an important milestone at Karate Labs. A solution that blends itself into an existing developer workflow, delivers an authentic developer experience. The sole passion, dare I say obsession, to deliver this authentic experience is what gave birth to Karate 6 years ago. The ease of getting started, 60% less code, commonly referred to as low code, executing tests faster, seamless integration with existing infrastructure, robust documentation. All of these enabled Karate make test automation simple and fun. The fact that Karate has earned the respect and word-of-mouth praise of developers and QA professionals worldwide, the fact that 415 companies, including 42 of the Fortune 500 companies, use Karate is a testimony to Karate delivering this authentic experience every day. We incorporated Karate Labs in 2021 with a promise of remaining true to the origin of Karate. That is, write tests faster, write better tests, and drive collaboration by onboarding wider teams. For example, a request from users was the ability to convert or reuse existing test scripts. The pro features in our plugins give users the ability to import from Postman, OpenAPI, Swagger, curl, and HR files and generate Karate tests. OpenAPI and Swagger support can also generate a mock file useful for contract testing, creating an API playground, or documenting sequences of API calls, and more on this in a bit. We made onboarding of Karate frictionless with our IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code plugins, enabling enterprises release customer benefit faster. More importantly, Karate has always been and will continue to be local first, which means customers will have no need to upload data to the cloud with Karate. We have lots under development. But today is about how Karate is reimagining API documentation. Companies of all sizes have built their businesses on APIs. And we all know the demand for APIs will continue to rise. Developers are eager to learn how to make use of your APIs. Hence, API documentation takes center stage when it comes to time to first call. Developers need API documentation that is comprehensive, well-designed, and easy to use. Essentially, it is the crux of usability of an API. Poorly written documentation leads to a world of pain and difficulty for developers. The more difficult it is to understand and consume the API, the higher the chance of the API not delivering value. The team at Karate Labs is excited to announce the launch of API documentation branded as Kflow or Karate Flow. Kflow is an enterprise solution that solves for API documentation with a focus on end-user workflows using an intuitive drag and drop, no-code experience, leading to powerful API documentation. The moment of impact for users will be immediate, as with a no-code interface, first-class OpenAPI and Swagger support, export to pure HTML for publishing or internal collaboration, showing how APIs are called in sequence as a business workflow, showing variations of a given API due to business rules. More importantly, all of the above integrated within your IDE, starting with Visual Studio Code and GitHub Code Spaces. Kflow will enable enterprises sanitize their fragmented tool landscape as they onboard Karate for API testing, API performance testing, API mocks, and API documentation. Hence the slightly tongue-in-cheek title of this launch, API into 4. Now we know what the eyes cannot see, the heart cannot believe. It's my pleasure to pass the baton on to Peter, who will walk you through a demo of Kflow. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Kapil. And let me share my screen. There we are. I know all of you are waiting to see the good stuff in Kflow. I'll just set a little bit of context. What you're looking at is the Karate Visual Studio Code plugin experience. And I just want to introduce a couple of new features in the latest version of the Pro plugin that Kapil talked about. This is an API test that actually performs 3 calls in a loop. And something that's new, and those who have seen previews of this really like this feature. The main thing here is that we have brought the test reports into the IDE experience. You don't need to leave Visual Studio Code at all. This, by the way, is especially relevant if you are using code spaces or a remote development environment, which is a new trend. You get the interactivity, and a lot of you are really going to like this. This is the HTTP specific report. So if your test makes API calls or HTTP calls, you get to see them in this very nice visualization. You can see a friendly grid view or the usual JSON view. It's all built in, and it's all within your IDE. Okay, so that just wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the new things in the existing plugin of the Visual Studio Code plugin. So now we come to flows. And before I get into the demo, just a little bit of context on flows and variation. Most API documentation today focuses on just one API at a time. You have a bunch of endpoints. You'll have get, post, and whatnot. But if you think about it, most meaningful use cases or your customer, your end user flows, most of them are sequences of API calls. When someone traverses through your front end, you would be doing something like create account, then create order, make reservation, update order, and so on. And these are typically flows. And I'll show you some examples. And the main thing here is that with Kflow, we are giving you a solution where you can actually model these flows and document these flows. So you can actually give off documentation to a consumer of your API saying, for this use case, these are the API calls you need to make in this sequence. And these are chained sequences, right? The result of one API may feed into the next API. And let me show you a demo of that and then talk about variations. I'll have this slide as kind of a guide as we go through the session. So let me give you a sense of how you start with Kflow. I'm going to create a new folder, call it demo, and test. The file type, no surprises here, is .kflow. So the moment I create a file type of .kflow, we've got this flow editor, which is the no-code interface, and you can start dragging and dropping. I'm going to drag and drop this HTTP node. And this is the first request which is a get to first. And I'm also going to actually fake the HTTP, the expected JSON response for this first API. And I'm just typing in dummy data for now. And one thing to note is that it's so easy to type. You don't need to worry about double quotes and being strict JSON. This is just like lenient JavaScript flavored JSON. And of course, Karate, the backend takes care of expanding your JSON properly. But we are ready. We have created one HTTP request that took a few seconds. And if I right click and run this path, immediately you see some visualization of your API, including the payload that you just modeled. Now, you must be wondering, this is very boring. This is just an API call. But here's the neat part. You can actually add markdown documentation. So this is a heading. And this is some markdown. I'm putting markdown within backticks. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with markdown and know what happens. You'll see this very nice rendering. So your takeaway is that you've seen how you can immediately preview the documentation and the API information that you're authoring within seconds. That feedback loop is very tight. And So you must be wondering, what about sequences, right? I started off by saying sequences are a big deal. So I'm going to add now a second HTTP call. This time I want to model a post to a second path. I am going to put in a request dummy data again. Let me try to put in an array this time just for variety. 1, 2, 3. Make sure I have it well formed. And there you are. We have two APIs in sequence. The first one is kind of documented, and the second one has a complex payload as the request and the response. You must have seen that export HTML button. So let me show you what that can do. That's actually one of the coolest things about the solution we have right here. You can actually export this documentation that you've just authored. And keep in mind that you've authored this without needing any API server, any actual API backend and all that. It's all simulated. And let me open the local file. And this, by the way, is another very interesting aspect that you need to think about. Everything that's happening right now is on your local machine. It's a Visual Studio Code plugin, which is like a desktop application. And the great thing here is that none of your data is going to some SaaS platform or going beyond your firewall. And this is a big deal. The reason I stress this is a lot of our existing users, especially the financial and the banks and the institutions like that, they care so much about security and all these aspects. And this feature is very, very important to many of our users. I opened that HTML file, and the great thing, this is just elegant, pure HTML that looks rather nice. We even have dark mode. So that should be proof to you that this is plain HTML that you can actually put onto any hosting option that you have, a static website, CDN. And of course, you would have full control over the colors, the branding. You can put in your logo and so on. And just zip this up, send it within your enterprise, and it's good to go. So the point here is that you can actually author these API flows using Kflow, and then you can actually share these artifacts, the end results of these documented flows with any team in your organization that you choose. Okay, so now let me come to variation. Variations are interesting because one of the, again, limitations of probably existing options for API documentation is that they tend to focus on just one API at a time. And it's very hard to model all the errors and the variations. And I don't just mean a 400, a 404 or a 500 error. Those are kind of okay. But what's more interesting is the business rules that result in behavior changes in your APIs. And one of our inspirations, or one of the reasons we actually went down this path, is because of some of our users, especially in the travel domain. And think about a hotel reservation, right? It sounds very simple, but behind the scenes, depending on the day of the week, your hotel reservation rate changes depending on whether you have loyalty points or the type of room. There's so many things. And what if the rooms are not available? Things start to change. But you get the picture, right? One API can actually result in wildly varying JSON responses, depending on context, depending on the business rules, and depending on what API calls happened before it. Okay. And I'm going to show you how Karate actually handles, or Kflow handles, being able to model these variations. First, let me show you this example, which is going to introduce another concept called live mode. We have a node which is an HTTP config, where you can, of course, fix the global URLs, the URL that will be used by all of your other nodes. And if I open up the settings, you see that this particular flow is set to work in live mode. And what does that mean? Live mode means it's actually going to make real live HTTP requests right now. So this, some of you may be very familiar with this particular set of API calls. This is the RESTful Booker application, quite useful for testing APIs. And of course, I chose this because this is a hotel reservation use case. So I'm going to run this flow, and it's taking time because behind the scenes is actually going to the internet. Yeah, that actually happened quite fast. And we got back all the good stuff. We also have documented this API to some extent. I can do a lot better, but yes. And let me now show you a variation of this, right? So I'm going to now simulate a variation. And here's where you're going to see something very interesting, which is one of the key aspects of Kflow, the splitting of your use case into variations. Let me get rid of this node, which I don't want. I'm going to add another node right now, which is post to booking. But this time I don't care. I'm going to fake, I'm going to send some bad data. And I know for a fact that this data is actually going to result in a 500 response code, which is a server error. Okay. Now watch while I actually introduce the concept of a split in the path. There is a node of type fork, which means that you can actually split your path. Some of this is backend stuff. I just call this scenario. And this is the happy path. And I can add a sad path. Yeah, it's not a very great name. And I'm actually going to connect these paths to the nodes that I already have in my flow. And boom, you see on the left, the interesting visualization of your path. It's got two paths. And let me run this right-hand path. And there we are. We have this 500 error. It's actually made a live call. But because we just sent a very invalid payload as a request, the server, as expected, resulted in a 500. And if I run this other path, that should be fine. That's, of course, the normal happy path of the booking, right? And again, I can export this. So by the way, one of the things I really want to highlight here, because we are in Visual Studio Code and we have the advantage of the amazing platform, which is an IDE platform at its core. I'm actually going to hit Control Z, which is to do undo. And you see what's happened on the left, right? Undo and redo works like a charm. That's just one of the great things we get with the IDE approach. And may I remind you, everything is local. The file, Kflow file that we are creating is on the local file system. You can check it into Git. It will be formally version controlled. You'll get track changes and all that good stuff. And watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to right click on the same file, say open to the side. And I'm just giving you an example of how would you manage when your flow really gets complex and you want to do these, collaboration with other teams and study and talk about, discuss your flows. So on the left, I'm going to click on node number 3. And on the right, I'm going to click on node number 4. And you can immediately see this is a great way for you to compare different sections of your flow, which may be quite complicated. And it's all in this wonderful no-code user interface that gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. Okay. And just to make sure I'm hitting all the points I need to cover, I talked about HTML export and I talked about live mode. Yes, let me talk about OpenAPI and Swagger for a moment. So if you have an existing OpenAPI spec, and I'm using the infamous pet store example, and here's the flow. So we have a node which is specifically for API specifications, and all you need to do is actually just refer to the YAML or the JSON file of your spec, your Swagger, and OpenAPI is supported. Just refer to that file by relative path. And once you give this node a formal name by which you refer to it in other nodes. So let's go to another node. If I look at this node, the only thing you need to do in now the HTTP node is match the method and the path to one of the APIs documented in your spec. And since on the spec tab here, which I'm about to click, we have referred to our spec. When I run this path, it's going to document the actual examples, it's going to pull out the examples of the request and response from the spec and also pull out the documentation of the spec. So what does this mean? There are two important aspects here. One, if you have OpenAPI or Swagger already in place, you can reuse those artifacts. But even more interesting is that you can actually overlay Kflow workflows on top of OpenAPI. And some of you would be aware that OpenAPI and Swagger, they don't really solve for workflows of APIs that well. So here's where Kflow can come in. And yes, you could even compose multiple specifications into one flow and have some very interesting options that way. And last, before I hand it back to Kapil, just want to make sure I've covered everything. I've covered flows, yes, variations. I showed you the HTML export, everything within your local environment and firewall. And I'll end by just giving you a flavor and a sense of what the options are for model-driven testing and complex workflows. And let me just bring up one of the examples. Yeah, I have this. Yeah, it looks like a very complex example. It's quite a busy screen. You can zoom in and look at the various things that are going on. But this is a very real use case, which is deciding whether someone can be given a loan, the loan approval use case. And you can see on the left, you have the most unhappy path where the income is too low, so you are immediately kicked out of the system. Or if your income is moderate, you are asked more questions about your outstanding debt and whether your credit history is bad or not. And you can take widely different paths. So decision tables, decision trees, and test data generation are some of the things we have lined up for the future. We have started out focusing on just APIs for now, but there's a lot coming down in future releases, so stay tuned for that. With that, I shall stop the share and hand it back to Kapil. There you go.
Thanks so much, Peter. As always, passionate delivery. Let me sum up on our behalves. Let me reshare again. So just summarizing, we want Kflow to drive collaboration between API consumer and producer. Yes, at launch, we are very API producer focused, giving the producer the ability to export documentation as HTML for the benefit of the API consumer, who then do not need to purchase a Kflow license. That said, the next few iterations will enable read-only and ability to edit few fields to drive further collaboration between producer and consumer. Karate believes that in the modern world, solution providers need to drive collaboration across teams. And as companies move to hosted environments in the cloud, Karate plugins are supported in GitHub code spaces. Which brings me to an opportunity to share yet another piece of news from our side, which is GitHub has selected Karate as a GitHub technology partner. We are going through the social media news release and blog announcement approval with GitHub. We expect it to be released actually either today or on the 1st of February. Us becoming a partner gives us the option to give our clients the ability to get the power of Karate in GitHub code spaces. Our YouTube channel has videos of how you can run a Karate API test directly in GitHub code spaces. And that brings me to the final piece, which is pricing. Karate Labs is a responsible for-profit company that will ensure, has always ensured, and will continue to ensure a balance between the need to improve the open source code and our commercial offerings. Paid for premium features have given us the ability to hire focused developers to work alongside Peter on both versions of the product, to continue releasing more features and expand the use of Karate. Kflow is priced at $499 per user per month if billed annually, or $599 per user per month. Please sign up using our website or Visual Studio, JetBrains, or OpenVSX Marketplace for a free 1-month trial. And for our enterprise users, if there are specific needs, please reach out to us directly. to discuss your needs and to arrange for a detailed demo. And finally, on behalf of Peter, myself, and the small yet focused growing Karate Labs team, taking this opportunity to thank our enterprise customers who participated in giving us input and feedback on Kflow. Your feedback has allowed us to build a product that take things to a new level across the industry. And last but not the least, we thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us today. We now open the forum for questions. If anybody has questions, you can raise your hand. I can unmute you. Just for the benefit, everything is live on Visual Studio Code, the marketplace. Our website, you can sign up through our website. Everything went live just a while ago. There are some demo videos already on our YouTube channel. So by all means, please give it a try and reach out to us. Artem has a question. Artem, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, guys. Thank you for the awesome presentation and for the new features added to the Karate. Looks actually very interesting. And my question about the flow as a live documentation would be this one. So on the simple examples, like with simple GET request or POST request, it looks pretty slick, pretty straightforward. But we know that especially for the POST request, usually there can be a bunch of dynamic data in the request, can be such as unique ID or the unique user. Without this type of data, the request is not possible, right? So make this request in the live API test, this data in the request body is fed automatically, for example, from the previous test. So with the Kflow, is this data in the objects is updated maybe automatically from the test executed, maybe feature executed, and the Kflow is updated, or this data in the Kflow diagram mostly serves as a, reference of how the object should look like for the future request in the downstream flow. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So you're right that in a simple case, what you saw today, you can have the JSON expressed by hand. But in complex scenarios, I think, Artik, you're talking about two things. One, yeah, when you really have complex JSON variations, you don't want to keep, cutting and pasting all of these. And the answer is yes. If you think about it, behind the scenes, we still have, parts of Karate's technology. And I know you are quite familiar with how Karate works. You can actually, in a Karate automated test, chain and do all kinds of things besides HTTP before you actually make an HTTP request, including the setup of JSON and manipulation of JSON and reuse of JSON, which I think your point is. Absolutely. So just the short answer to your question is that imagine if in what you saw today, a Kflow, you could add a node, and you may have seen in the canvas, you can actually pull in a script node. You will be able to actually plug in small snippets of code similar to Karate tests. Actually, behind the scenes, it will be JavaScript that allow you to do some kind of pre-request and even post-request kind of hooks. So short answer is yes, you will be able to actually extend a Kflow with custom code that will be called at the parts you choose during a flow. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think my question was more about if Kflow smart enough to pull to update the diagram with the objects request and response from the feature file that was executed. This was my question. For example, I run my feature file that have a certain flow already scripted, and then this automatically is updating the Kflow to the most latest version of the request and the response, how system should work. In this case, I know, okay, this is a valid payload object and valid response, and it's really live up-to-date diagram with a live up-to-date documentation.
That's a great question. So, and just make sure, right, you're actually talking about whether you can actually take an existing karate test and visualize it using this mechanism. Is that one of the questions?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So I take
Yeah.
my existing feature file and layout in the Kflow, and the
Yeah.
fill out of all the boxes with the request and response is coming from the executed test, not manually or additional JavaScript thing.
It's a great question. First, let me start by, this is certainly not the immediate focus. To be very transparent, right? Where we are coming from is that there's a whole set of users who may not be interested in test automation, who need to document their internal as well as public facing API. So we have designed this to address that, make it easy for non-technical folks to come in quickly, create documentation. And I think we have gotten really far with that. That said, absolutely cool. It would be great if you could take existing karate tests and then visualize them this way. Where we are starting with Artem is that we would, in the near term, support things like importing curl and then generating these flows. And you know that when we run a karate test, you already have all the information about all the HTTP calls made. The problem, Artem, is that it may be a lot more than you really want to document. And that's a very interesting balance. We have some ideas around that. One idea is that if you annotate your karate tests so that only those parts get documented into a Kflow, that is really one direction we are planning to go down.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Stu. We have a question.
I just wanted to add, for everybody's benefit, a little bit of plug for OpenAPI, that Peter and Kapil are very involved in that. So we do have a workflow special interest group and a travel special interest group. And again, these excellent gentlemen are in the middle of those conversations. So we are working through as a community API sequence issues, and we're starting with the happy path. And we will gradually get into the less than happy paths and some of the convoluted logic we may have to apply to that. So this is a fantastic start. Congratulations, guys.
Thank you, Stu.
Thank you.
Peter will second me when I say, Stu, we have learned a lot from the day we met you last in, I think, the middle part of last year when we became OpenAPI Initiative members. And please continue challenging us and coaching us and guiding us too. So thank you so much for all your inputs till date. Any other questions? Great. Thank you all so much for joining. The recording will be made available. Anything else, you know where to reach us. Peter, thanks once again. Your passion is always contagious. Thanks so much, man. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.